Hey, okay.
Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming to this last session, I believe, of the festival, certainly, for Co-Create Poetica. And really happy to have you here. We're going to have a conversation around stage and international audiences. And I have with me on this wonderful panel visitors from abroad, if I may put it that way. And so I'd like to introduce Dean.
Hi.
Sjaan and Akwasi. Thank you so much for having been here. And I know we're just having a conversation about how much they've experienced being in Cape Town. So I actually wanted to start with this very small story as a way of kind of segue into the conversation. I remember my first experience on stage. I was 4. And so we were having graduation for preschool, kindergarten. And so we had our little gowns and our little hats. Your hair was all done up and you were ready to go. But for some reason, I completely freaked out, as you do as a 4-year-old. And I started crying. And I just wept and I refused to go on stage. Then they bribed me with bubble gum. My mom's friend gave me, I've never forgotten, it was a yellow piece of bubble gum. And it did the job. It did the job. So I'm wondering, as performers, and I know you do a lot and we'll get to that, but what's your bubble gum? What gets you on stage?
Beautiful question.
Yeah.
I've never even thought of if there was kind of an incentive for me to get on stage, but of course there has to be, in a sense. How should I answer that?
Wow.
Well, the thing is, there is, especially in kind of the realm of writing and poetry, there is something secluded about the practice, right? So it's you, the pen, the page, and it's kind of this little bubble that you live in. But I believe that all art is created to communicate, and you need kind of a community or an audience or whatever to have that exchange. So this is, I guess, my bubblegum, this inherent need to not make it just my own, but to offer it to somebody else to do whatever they like with it, right? Because the truth of a poem is always in between what I give out and how somebody receives it. So this is the incentive, and there is something that is kind of addictive to that, where when you're on because if you give somebody a poem on a page, you're giving it into their little bubble, right? So in their own intimacy. But when you share a poem on a stage, there is this instant relationship that you build, and this is and it's tangible and it's real and it's magical. So it's more of a feeling that is that incentive than anything else.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my bubblegum is the potential of it. Yeah, and the potential energy, because it's like the way you can communicate or generate energy between the audience and a performer, that's like nothing else. So that's my bubblegum. So like before I go on, and I don't want, like, even for tonight, like, I'm nervous. I'm gonna do something that I've not done before. So always that moment of you know that. So the potential of the energy that might happen, like this flow of energy between the audience and me. Yeah, that's my bubblegum. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think for me, I just need to listen to my heart. That's it. In Holland we say, volg je hart, dat klopt. Which means, follow your heart. Your heart is always right. And kloppen means knock knock, boom boom, boom boom. So I try to concentrate to my heart. Because even when I write, everything I write comes from the mind. When I voice it, it comes from the heart. So when I listen to my heart, that prepares me to go on stage.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And what's the most difficult performance which you've ever experienced? I can start by sharing so that it's less embarrassing. But I once had to perform for 20 people in a 1,000-seater venue. Something that was probably equal was there's a bar called I think it's the River Club, and for some reason, even though there'd been music the whole day, they decided to put poetry at 7 p.m. when people had been drinking.
Always.
I don't know why they do that.
So people had been drinking since like 12 or something, so they were 7 hours in. By the time I got on stage, the only person who was really listening was my sister. So I ended up just performing to my sister. It was really difficult to get through the set, and all I was debating in my head was, should I just stop? Will they notice if I do? You know? So those are some of the most difficult I've had that made it difficult sometimes even to get back on. So I wondered for you if you've had any really difficult.
Yeah, I've had like 10, like so many of the same experiences as you just described them. But also, I have two examples. One is where I was in a library, and it was like this market where like this jaarmarkt, like a year market, and they asked me to do poetry, but really no one, like not even like the people that came, I guess they don't even know what poetry is or never listened to it. Like it was totally wrong. I don't understand why they put me there. But then I started, like, I jumped off the stage and just started going to people and saying, hey, can I drop a poem? And then it worked.
Wow.
And I reached like 20 people. Yeah, so that was good. And another example was what was really hard was one moment when I experienced how vulnerable you are for also just projections of people from the audience, because people are in a safe space, they can just project stuff on you. So it actually didn't happen to me, it happened to my friend. We were in a performance with a group, with my collective, poetry collective. And there was, my friend was on stage doing a poem about love, and he got some racist attacks from the audience, so we had to step off the stage and leave. And that was the first moment where I realized it's a brave thing to be on stage as well sometimes.
Where was this?
It was in the Boekenbal, Bladenbal, Club Up. Yeah, Club Up. It was like 8 years ago. Quincy, Gabriel,
And how did he respond?
Because the audience member said something like, "You're a Negro, say something interesting or say something funny."
Why is your poem so sad? You're a Negro. You should say something fun.
So I know we want to talk about international audiences, but I think this raises something about even local audiences home. How is spoken word received, other than the more traumatic ways? But how is it perceived generally in the spaces in which you work in?
It's received pretty well, and you see that there's an emergence of appreciation for the craft, because I've always lived in that in-between, right? Because I've been writing poetry ever since I was 9 years old, so I've read a lot. So a lot of my work is informed by what I've read, right? So that more kind of classical page poetry or whatever. But I'm also raised as a hip-hop kid, so and I've done a lot of theater, so the stage always had kind of a gravity pulling me in. Yeah. And what you noticed is that a few years ago, people were a bit standoffish because they didn't really get it. They didn't know. They were, there's a lot of these urban youth telling their stories, and they couldn't really place it anywhere. But the beauty of it is that sense of community, right? So with people finding each other throughout the country, finding each other and keeping at it, created kind of this wave. And we see now that a lot of people are picking up the pen and searching out these spaces to tell their stories. And what I find interesting is kind of the shift, because in that more classical literary scene, there's a lot of kind of judgment towards each other and what is and isn't good. And in my humble opinion, what I've noticed in the spoken word scenes, and I've even noticed it here, and I've been here since like what, Monday, is that the community aspect of spoken word is inherent to the craft. So it's not about who outperforms who, it's giving room for everybody's story, right? And this is, I think, really important because, you know, in a grander scheme, young people are kind of used to not being taken seriously or their stories being negated in a sense. But we view the world, and with the emergence of the digital era and everything, we not only just carry the weight of just our own experiences, but we absorb these experiences from all over the world right now. So we carry that as well, which is good and bad, right? So I think that this is what's manifesting right now in the Netherlands, where people are getting it, basically.
I don't know if you have any additions to that.
I think it was well put. What do you think?
Just as a time scale to know that I think it's like there's no tradition of spoken words, or there's not a lot of oral traditions in the Dutch society, like samenleving society. So traditions, and this has been coming up since 4-5 years in the last 2 years. So it's really like it's a child.
Yeah, but if we compare it to Belgium, Belgium has a way bigger spoken word culture than in Holland, so it's still growing. It's like it's in the children's shoes, and it needs to hit puberty.
Yeah.
And we haven't hit puberty yet.
All right, we're getting there.
Do you think that might, be further reflected in your audiences? And I ask this with this particular framework, that sometimes when we think about the audiences for poetry on stage, it's generally other poets, other artists. There's a sort of ready-made audience that we have access to, as it happens with festivals. People that are here enjoy books. They enjoy performances, hopefully. I hope I'm speaking to the right people. So there's a tendency towards, or a propensity for the culture. My question is, what might be some of the most interesting non-traditional spaces where, I love the example of the library where you went up to people and said, can I offer you a poem? Where else have you offered poetry?
Well, I kind of did a similar thing, but it wasn't in the context of a festival or an event. I was just kind of bored, and I was in a train, and I was just, let me try something, right? So I just walked up to people, sit next to them, and was like, can I offer you a poem? And people, first, I mean, the way I was dressed, I can imagine that people were like, you and poetry, because I kind of looked like a bum because I didn't do my laundry, right? So I had the clothes on that were left. But people's initial response was like, but it wasn't me asking for money, it wasn't me asking for direction, it was me offering a poem. And this is something that, so after the first, what the hell is this? They realized what I was offering, and every one of them said yes.
Wow.
And this is where something magical happens, because you're capable of offering something to people that normally wouldn't search out or look for poetry, right? And this is where you see where language has truly a magical effect, where even people that don't necessarily search for it, you're capable of filling something that they were missing but didn't know that they were missing, right? So this is where that happens for me.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Sjaan?
Oh, I've dropped poems
More.
everywhere. Everywhere, yeah, so many places. I've dropped poems, in the train between friends, but on many different stages. I think, like, I've done we called it eargasm, which was like people lying down, having headphones on, and just being able to close from and blindfolded. I've done theater tour with dance and dropped poetry in like a big space with 400 middelbare secondary school children, you know. And I've done on the streets of Ouro, which is a festival. Like we built like a super small box, and I was in that box, and there was like something that came out so you could put it to your ear, and I was like dropping bombs there. So yeah, it's been, yeah, I don't know, yeah, I've been dropping bombs with a megaphone, like,
Wow.
just, yeah, that's why there's no boundaries in that for me. Like there's no, you don't need, I'm a dancer as well, but for, like, I experience as a dancer, I need too much, like ik heb te veel dingen nodig. I need space, you know, I need music, or no, but I mean, I need, like, for poems, I can just do it anywhere, which makes it, for me, accessible. Yeah, more accessible.
And I think something interesting happens when you engage in poetry outside of the book and outside of its kind of the context that you're used to engaging poetry. So it just shifts kind of reality as we perceive it, which is important, I think.
Absolutely.
And I've seen this development, even with more classical poets, they're looking for other ways of presenting their poetry. So they're looking for interactions with different cultural disciplines. They're looking for theater spaces. They're looking for ways of finding new audiences, especially young poets, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Akwasi?
Yeah, what more can I add? They're saying the right things. I think everywhere I go, I try to put the stamp of poetry. So it can be on the radio, it could be on television, it could be in festivals, music venues, because I'm a recording artist as well. So everywhere I go, I try to add a bit of spoken word or poetry to their portfolio.
Yeah.
I think that's important, and people need to get accustomed with this beautiful phenomenon. That's it. Period.
I actually love that you've all touched on what's going to be my next question. The influence of other art forms in terms of performance. So I looked you up, obviously. I couldn't read all the articles, most of them were in Dutch. But the English that I could find. And what I found is that all of you have an acting or theatre background, right? So that's a shared aspect, but you all also have different art forms. So I thought the question for each of you would be how your engagement with that particular genre or with that art form influences your performance of poetry, and it will lead to a question of language, because I'm thinking about embodiment, the use of the body on the stage. So for you, for example, I watched some of your Vivo videos, brilliant productions. For music and hip hop, what has its influence been on your work in spoken word? For Sjaan, so I'll give it to you and then you can think about it. Dancing, and again the question of embodiment, the use of the body, and thinking about poetry in performance. Dean, I found out you're an editor, so and you've mentioned a little bit about the page. So I'd love for you to think about the influence of the page on your work a little further.
So do we need to go outside right now and think about the question?
You've had enough time. You can start, actually.
No, I think that, because I graduated from the Theater Academy, and I think that's a really, that really expanded my horizon. I think that my references are bigger now that I know more of how to get on stage and how to work with my theatrical presence, because that's really important. Where to pause. I love pauses. I love silences on stage. I really love it. Even now. You can't stop with it, you know? So that's really delightful. And I just think that in Holland we say tekstbehandeling. Tekstbehandeling. It's like text treatment. How do you treat text? And we also say de zinnen moeten op je lippen geboren worden. When you provide a monologue, you need to make sure that every line gets a birth on your lips. like you spoke it out for the first time in your life. Even when you're playing 6 days a week, every time you do the monologue, it needs to be brand new. It needs to be a brand new baby every time, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, till Friday, Saturday. So that's what's giving this extra level, extra height, extra height, and extra depth in what you're doing. So I wouldn't want to miss my theatrical presence at all.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yeah.
Well, I think words are words, and they need life, and like the body is the life you can put into it. So it only makes sense to me that there's you work with the body, and I mean the voice is the body. So, but I started like I went to the dance academy, so I was a dancer, and I saw a spoken word performance once, and I right away knew that this way of communicating with the audience, or a way to talk about certain things that dance could never do. And so I started writing more and trying open stages and stuff. And then I found, doing that more, that there's like something that I could never tell with a poem. So it was kind of like this verbal and nonverbal language, it has to be together, it has to come together. So that was my starting point for just acknowledging or realizing that they belong together. The body and the words, like the voice, they belong together. They are effect of each other. We first spoke with our bodies, and then we found a way to write. So, I'm kind of not knowing where I'm going.
Well, we can stop there for now. We'll
Yeah.
circle back at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have quite a diverse background. So I have a background in theater, in dance as well, and I am an editor, but I'm it's a bit different. I'm an editor at the Literary Foundation, so we curate literary programs.
Oh, right. I see. Okay.
But in regards to your question, the influence of the page. The influence of the page manifests in the way that I approach language. So I was kind of an oddball child. I not only did I read a lot, but I kind of read the dictionary over and over again. So I had this interest in these kind of in the symbolism of language and these dead symbols that I can conjure up and create life from. So even in the spoken word scene, I've always felt as kind of an oddball because of the way that I approach languages, a bit different in the sense that it's not always really narrative heavy, which is kind of a staple in the spoken word, which is necessary in a sense because you want to engage audiences and you want to take audiences on a journey. But due to my experiences, due to my experiences in the theater, I know, and I hate this kind of self-congratulatory thing about something that you have had no influence in, but I have a specific character to my voice, so I also kind of use that as an instrument, right? So even in these more kind of abstract language structures, I use these theatrical tools to, in a way that draws them in, so it still feels like a story. It still feels like this natural flow of just consciousness in a sense. So this is the way I translate what I've cutting from the
on the
page
onto
to the
the
stage.
stage.
Yeah, just made me think that I also feel like if you're a performing poet, if you're performing your poems, you have a responsibility towards the poems that they are received the best way they can. So like this responsibility as well is what pushes me to the boundaries of like performance. You know, I go to music, I go to dance, I learn new tools for performance because a poem actually asks me to do that.
Wow,
So
beautiful.
this is really, yeah, and the other thing is that because the spoken word scene is super young in the Netherlands, I always felt like there's no, if you don't have a like you have to put the water in here, but if you don't know that, then you can also try something else. And this was really actually beautiful. I mean, it's weird that it doesn't have a tradition. Sometimes I miss it. Like yesterday with the vibe, with the audience, everybody understanding, the poem and like this. I'm missing sometimes, like this ground. But also it allows us to look freely to the experiment. Like
Certainly.
yeah.
Because you're not working against or in comparison to a tradition.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned, that responsibility, even towards the audience, because I'd like to try something where we're not just talking about our audience, but can I involve them? Can I involve you? You don't have a choice. So. I want to tackle the language question because that always intrigues me as part of this co-create project and thinking about collaboration between the Netherlands and South Africa. So as we spoke a little earlier, I've asked you to just prepare 1 to 2 minutes of a poem in Dutch. And what I'd like from my wonderful audience is to listen, take it in, and just reflect, just share a little bit about what it is that you're hearing, how you're receiving what they're sharing. Because I think part of the stage is the fact that it can be, if we allow it, it can be a one-way conversation. And we don't always have an opportunity to get feedback from the audience, to hear what it is that they're receiving in terms of what we're saying. So we'll reflect on your experiences of perhaps performing in Dutch in different countries and also performing in English, right? And old experiences around that. But I would like for our audience to experience you performing in Dutch and then to give us some of your thoughts and your feelings around that. So we'll just go one after the other, and after the third person, I'll invite the audience to.
All right, ladies first.
Oh, shit. Okay. So 1 or 2 minute poem? 1 or 2 minutes?
No,
or
just go as far as you need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
De kou die mijn lichaam bezet. De kou die alle kieren dichtkit. Om zeker te zijn van zijn plek die weet waar ik het over heb. Het onbehagelijke gevoel van de liefde. Als alle draagmuren staan, er gebouwd kan worden op een fundament van violen en rozen. Als alles goed gaat, als alles goed gaat, als alles goed gaat, dan voelt je liefde het meest onbehagelijk. Niet het liefdeslied is breekbaar, niet de trommelvlies zo dun en kwetsbaar is breekbaar. Niet de oren, niet de woorden, niet mijn liefde voor jou, niet wat geweest is of wat komen gaat. Niet de vlam die thuis verwarmt of de wind die de vlam uitdaagt. Niet hij zegt dat zij vindt, dat hij zegt dat hij vindt, dat zij zegt, maar niet zegt, dat niet. Maar als alles goed gaat, dan voelt je liefde het meest onbehagelijk op. Dagen, dat dagen vallen als as van een sigaret op een schoon tapijt. Een vlek alles is dat achterblijft. Op dagen dat jouw stem mijn bloedbaan bezet. En ik jouw broek en trui bewoon, je mijn geur draagt als zondagskleren. Jij morst op mijn onschuld en ik mors op jouw borst. We schermen met de veiligheidsdopjes op de punten van onze zwaarden. We sparren met vlagen van wijsheid, maar niemand krijgt gelijk. Op dagen dat alles goed gaat, wordt het niet beter dan dit. Zoals je niet te lang kan stilstaan op het zand van een woestijnvlakte. Zoals gif schuilt in de overdaad van water. Of glasscherven in een gelukskoekje. Een put die zich voordeed als een plas. As op een schoon tapijt, een vlek, alles is dat achterblijft. Zo kan ik niet te lang bij je blijven. Maar loslaten allerminst. Een wolkje condens. De kou weet waar ik het over heb.
No, all of you are going to go and then we'll come back.
Okay. I wrote something. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Er is geen goed of kwaad. Er is geen wit of zwart. Er is alleen zichtbaar en er is onzichtbaar. Maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen. Ik wil wat zeggen. Apartheid bestaat nog. Serieus man, ik lieg niet. Het heeft nu alleen een economische divisie. Ik zeg je, zwart is zalig, maar huidskleur is formidabel. Dus investeer in niet zwart, want binnenkort wordt dat rendabel. Of zijn we niet capabel? Hoeveel handen, hoeveel schakels tot succes? Tot die tijd veeg ik alles weg van tafel. Van mij mag zwart wat hoger, niet meer onderaan de ladder. Ik heb het tegen zwarte overs tot aan zwarte undercovers. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben. Agent zoekt naar een man als ik in een dikke bak, nog eerder dan die boeven pakt. Politie profileert etnisch, ik zeg ze doen maar wat. Ik zeg het nog een keer, we zitten met mentale slavernij hier in het heen en weer. Terwijl ik beleefd ben en groet met dag mevrouw en dag meneer. Kijk mensen donkerder dan mij. Kijken mensen donkerder dan mij met liefde op me neer. Ik heb geen ene moe gezegd, maar ben dan op de verkeerde plek. Als ik denk dat we onderweg zijn, is het echt de verkeerde weg. Ik wil wat zeggen, maar laten we het er niet over hebben.
We bouwden dit huis uit zand en rook. Nu is het aan de wind of overgave. Vingers bloeden die dagen nog na, want hier werden wij mannen. Borstharen ontvluchten de zware adem of zwaarder geworden stem van dit net ontdekt mens. Nee, wij waren niet enkel willekeur of agressie. Wij groeiden. We begeven ons onder kameraden en andere vreemden. Raar, doch zeldzaam volk. Gevangen in grilligheid en gevlekte spiegels. Sigaretten tussen de vingertoppen geklemd. Dit kot staat. Het passeert de tijd terwijl wij drinken als onze vaders. Terwijl zij drinken als het hunne. Het rolt weg met het slaan van een 13e uur op een dag die wij niet langer kiezen kunnen. Wij bestaan en hebben bestaan, zolang er zand of rook zal zijn.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. So, any feedback, any thoughts from the audience?
Zal ik proberen Afrikaans met je praten?
Ja,
Het was voor mij prachtig. Ik verstaan heel wat Hollands, maar niet genoeg nie. Maar jou lyftaal was lieflik. En die liefde waaroor jy gepraat het was lieflik. Ek wens ek kan dit lees. Miskien kan ek dit ergens kry op 'n webwerf of iets. Dankie.
Dis John.
Ja.
Sjaan.
Sjaan.
Dus wat ek kon verstaan is, die liefde is mooier as dit moeiliker is. Min of meer?
Ja, min of meer. Dat als het moeilijk is, als het makkelijk is, dan is het moeilijkst.
Okay.
So it's the most difficult when it's good.
When it's easy.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Akwasi, your poem was inspired by South Africa being here.
Yeah.
Okay. And you referenced apartheid and maybe being in how you're treated here in South Africa as a black man. Okay. I'm just checking. And then Dean, you have a beautiful voice, but I didn't really understand a lot of what you said. Something about wanting to say something.
This happens a lot, so don't worry about it. It's called The House of Sand and Smoke, and it's about how I'm gonna keep it at.
Okay, can I suggest that you chat to him after?
Okay.
After the.
Let's have that conversation.
Because I think there's something much more interesting that's happening in not understanding. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. I so enjoyed the ambiguity in, I think, all the poems, but the paradox even. But the acting out in your case was also so nice, and the reserved way in which he said that I have something to say, but let us not go into it. Of course, you want it to be gone into, but it was also this paradox that really struck me so well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ja, ek is ook Afrikaans en het 2 jaar in Nederland gewoon saam, so ek begryp eintlik Nederlands. Ek meen ek lees Nederlands sonder enige probleme. Dus my eerste waarneming was, al het ek nie alles mooi kon hoor en begryp nie, ek het 'n bietjie van 'n gehoorprobleem op, so dit hang ook daarmee saam, was dit vir my baie mooi, heel erg mooi, né? Om na die Nederlands te luister, want dit respondeer, what is the word? Responds with me, resonates with me, since I lived in Holland for 2 years. So I think, you know, what the audience also brings in a lot, your own experience. So yeah, I really appreciated that you brought in the Dutch as well, even though you don't understand. And I think for us in South Africa, it's also important, especially with the oral poetry, where there's so many other things come in, that even if you don't understand the language, you can just experience, you know, what is said, because the poetry is so much more than just the words, especially the oral poetry. And then the second thing that struck me, but that doesn't have to do with the language as such, is that when you read your poems, you read it in a different voice than when you just spoke about the poetry. And that is, yeah, I think that is also very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Many years ago, Ankie Krog ran something called the Tradewinds Poetry Festival, and she took poets from the Netherlands and a number of former colonies, so like poets from Suriname, to libraries around Cape Town, and the kind of area that I grew up in, Athlone. They brought some of these poets there, and there was a poet from Suriname, and before he read in his language. Ankie said, a poem is felt before it is understood, and that never left me. And for me, there's something, I think that like this notion of understanding language is such a monolingual thing. And it's very much like a global north perspective. And that actually language lives in the body. And when we learn how to listen, we can feel what is trying to be conveyed, even if our minds can't jump like around it. Which is why I was like, please don't tell us, I don't actually want to know. And so for me, the experience was I closed my eyes and I was listening to each of your voices and how the texture of the voices also convey the poem, even if, and not just the musicality, but feeling the embodiedness of where the voice lives in each of your own bodies. And so the spaces in your bodies that you were speaking from, And that was a really beautiful experience, so thank you.
Yeah, it's nice because like I imagine that you saying this, a poem travels through the body while you recite, and this is also with dancing, you know? So it's actually, energetically, it's the same thing, it's just different muscles, you know, working and shaping you in different ways, but energetically it's like, it's like...
And I love this idea of language living in the body. There's an amazing poetry festival in Rotterdam. I think it's one of the oldest poetry festivals in the world. This year they have the 47th edition.
Wow.
47th year. It's the Poetry International Festival Rotterdam. And they invite poets from all over the world, right? So you would have a Finnish poet, and somebody from Chile, and somebody from Peru, and somebody from India, and just all over the world. And they have a limited set because they perform like 3 or 4 times, but you have to pay translators and all these things, so they kind of have a limited set that they do. And I would always go to the same poets twice. The first time, just sit in the theater, eyes closed, and let the sonics, let the emotion, let the energy of a language work on me in whatever sense. And then the second time I will read, because I do want to know what I'm talking about. But the weird thing is, I always kind of catch myself grasping kind of the intent of a poem without even understanding. And this is why I thought it was interesting that just, you said it, I'm so sorry, of that we kind of entered a different voice. I think this is what that is, right? So it's recognizing what the poem is, and then kind of inhabiting it with all the changes that it does to you, both physically, mentally, whatever, right? So, yeah.
You've actually touched on something that I wanted to respond to, or rather think about, because something very interesting happened here, which I wasn't anticipating, which I probably should have. Does anyone here not speak Afrikaans? Okay. So I want to hear from... Okay, Afrikaans and Dutch. So I'd love to hear from you how you experienced the poetry, because I think what happened was with speaking Afrikaans and the proximity of the two languages created actually a different way of listening, because I'm interested in how we listen when we don't understand the language and we're interpreting the body, but also how you work to make meaning when you know that the people that are listening may not necessarily understand the words. So the work that you do, for example, when you're performing in the Netherlands versus performing in South Africa for different audiences. And I say that because although I didn't understand as much of the Dutch, I understood the Afrikaans. So there was like a second degree of separation where I could understand what was happening here, but it was close to Afrikaans to Dutch, right? And I'm sure you go to countries where that's not even the case. Like there's just no problem. So I wanted to hear how you guys listened. Yeah. Oh, you speak Dutch?
Yeah.
Do you speak Dutch as well? No, just English. Yeah, as long as you were in the room when it was happening.
Hello, hi.
Okay.
So I can see, like, it was really, like, when I was watching the performances, I didn't really understand what was being said. I could grasp one or two. Afrikaans wasn't the strongest subject in school for me. But the way you guys performed, even though you're sitting down, just the slight facial expressions or the tone of voice or being static in the chair or moving, you had more happy moments in your poem where, in your case, it felt of a more serious tone because you were just static in the chair and speaking in one tone. And then as well with you, it's just the performance part of it. And then once I heard what the crowd had to say, explaining each one of your poems, I was kind of almost on the same line of what the tone of the poem was about. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I want us to close off with this question. Actually, it's going to be 2 questions you can kind of distribute unevenly among yourselves. The first being, if the audience has to do a certain kind of work in collaboration with you to listen, to find new ways of listening that aren't just about, linguistic. What kind of work are you doing to make meaning? And the second question is what is your experience of going to different countries, going to different parts of the world, and occupying the position of foreigner, in essence, right? Because now you also have a barrier in some ways. I don't know if you've only ever been to English-speaking countries? No, okay. So what does it mean for you to step into those spaces where it's the crowd that holds the power of language, but you're on stage on your own? So you can answer one of those two questions.
Can you reiterate the first question?
So if the audience is working to listen in ways other than the linguistic, what are you doing?
I always tell my students, like, if you want to step on stage and bring your poetry, so you have this responsibility, that's the first thing. And the second thing, don't just expect the audience, don't just drop it in their laps and say, oh, you deal with this. You grab them softly by the hand and you take them, and both together you walk over the poem. So it's like, it's a very soft approach I try to do. So it's a lot of, like, there's, for example, in the theater, if you're in the theater, it's a black box, you're more like sending and much less receiving. But in a lot of situations where I do poetry, and that's why I also like poetry a lot, is it's sending and receiving at the same time. So this is going on. So you know when the audience is not getting it. And most of the time I just repeat myself. You know when they're not hearing it, when they're not understanding, you know when you don't, and those are painful moments.
Yes.
But
we've all been there.
Okay.
I believe that a lot of the work and it all boils down to this. It's acknowledging where you are, who you're sharing the space with. So, yes, it is a privilege to be on stage and perform whatever it is that you've written, but you should recognize that it is only a privilege because of the audience, right? So, if I'm performing, I'm not doing it to be seen or heard only. I mean, that's part of it, but I'm also there to see the audience, to see them, and not just see them as kind of a collective of bodies, but see them as individuals willing to offer me their time, their energy, their attention. So it's about taking everyone sitting in the audience, and in this context, everyone that's sitting here listening to us, serious as an individual, knowing that they have their own kind of personal filter, which is just as relevant and necessary as mine is. So that's the word I put in.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm thinking about it, but I think it's important wherever you go to always adapt to your audience and adapt to your country where you are, and try to blend in as much as you can. So it's impossible to know how the people live in South Africa or in Great Britain or in Brazil, but as long as you move with the locals, you can get a bit of an impression. And I would advise that, and I would encourage everyone to do that, because that's the most important thing.
Exactly.
Go where the locals go, eat where the locals live, live where the locals live, and speak. Try to blend in as much as you can. I think that's
never be the tourist.
Never be?
The tourist.
The tourist. No, never be. Even when you come to Amsterdam, you can ride a bicycle. That's fine, but don't go too much on the water ferries. Try to mingle with the people from Holland and Amsterdam. So, and eat cheese. Cheese is good.
Do you secretly have a contract with a cheese company? What is this, Akwasi?
Cheese is the eighth wonder of the world. Let's just agree to that.
We'll have to experience it for ourselves. We'll have to come up and check it out. Thank you so much. So we're just
Thank
going to
you.
take a few questions and then we'll close off. Any questions, perhaps? Or even comments. It doesn't just have to be. Okay, Aaron's bring a mic.
I was wondering if, do you think performance poetry, like, what is the Dutch reading culture like when it comes to poetry? There, like, do the youth read poetry?
Yeah.
We all got different opinions, I guess.
Yeah, I think
Probably.
Okay,
so
let's get all three, just like.
Okay.
I think the youth listens to music.
Yeah.
Some here and there listens to they listen to lyrics. I guess that's the poetry that's the first to reach them. I think it's exceptional for youth to read poetry. That's also why it's very powerful to be in South Africa as a poet, because like people are famous here. Poets are famous. Like poets are like, you have bestsellers, poetry books. We don't have that. In the Netherlands, a poetry book, it a bestseller poetry book would sell 800 copies in a country of like 17, 18 million people.
Really?
Let me jump in here.
Yeah,
just,
that's average.
this is interesting because this was the case for us for a long time. So what you're seeing now as bestsellers is actually pretty new. There was,
beautiful.
we were, I think it's actually, that it's happening.
Cool.
So I think that they say that, we heard this earlier, that not necessarily a bestseller, but the average number of books that are sold is about 600 for English. And then I forgot the other numbers. Yeah. So this, what you're seeing is literally the beginning of the wave.
Yeah, and then we see like a growing community of spoken word artists, and that's where the youth goes, you know, because they are free. They don't have to write in a sort of way, form, shape, be good, you know, be literal, meet this standard. So it has, you know, made it easier for the youth to engage.
True, but that also has have problematic implications. I mean, in an emerging digital world, right? Reading just isn't the thing to do for a lot of people anymore.
I disagree completely, because you read on your smartphone. The kids read a lot on their smartphones. They read all the time. They don't read. They don't necessarily read books physically, but they read on a cell phone.
I'm not trying to say that they don't engage in literature in their own ways,
but I mean, even if it's quotes, you know, like quotes on I guess like. No.
But go on. All right. Maybe I'm cynical, but I teach a few high schools, right? And there's this disconnect, and there's really something emerging that I find really troubling and worrisome, is that there is a distance towards language. I mean, we have to be aware of the bubble that we inhabit, right? So we live in this literary bubble, in this performance bubble, but there's language being lost.
Yeah, but
there's grasp of language being lost, and
I think what you see in the schools with students engaging in their lessons, it's a problem in every class. You know, it's not because of poetry.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's easy to kind of be really hopeful in a sense, because we inhabit spaces that give us what we want to see in a sense. But there is something happening where people are losing kind of that connection towards certain things, towards poetry. Because honestly, I've been in a lot of countries, and I've seen what poetry can do in a lot of countries, and it is not happening in the Netherlands. There is this emergent spoken word scene, which I'm absolutely grateful for, but we shouldn't overestimate what is happening.
No, but it's not true, because more and more schools ask for spoken word lectures, masterclasses, rap. Like rap music is being like the lyrics are being, you know, taught and being discovered in classes. So I'm sorry, I have a total I think it's coming up.
It's coming up. As I mentioned before, we need to hit puberty, and right now we're here, coming from Rotterdam and Amsterdam, because we're obviously carrying a spoken word torch. And we need to just light that fire in Holland and make sure that it grows. We must never slack. We always must go on, and we need to bring out bundles so that people in the newer generation can see that spoken word is alive. It needs to be just as alive as in South Africa. Right now, South Africa is advanced in spoken word, and Holland is right here. But we're coming up because we're here for a reason. So.
I'm going to jump in because of time. If I could summarize, it's probably some do, some don't.
Yeah.
And it depends on the experience. I think it's a fair assessment.
I think so.
Because I think we also want to be careful of sort of painting an overall picture. Because I would say we have different experiences here as well. And some of them are usually around class. Who has access to reading, who has access to books. Not that the intention or desire isn't there, but also the understanding that there's a creation of new connections and new ideas around language. And maybe because we have a deep history with oral literature and performance poetry that precedes spoken word, like well into sort of 17th, 18th century. And that history actually exists in the contemporary moment. So the idea of praise poetry is still performed today. So some of the poetry which you heard yesterday draws from that tradition. But the idea of poetry is maybe somewhat different, that it's not necessarily written, but what's being passed down orally as well. So I think there's space for conversation after this. Any more questions? We'll take one more before we close off. No. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I really enjoyed that conversation. I think it opened up something for us as well in terms of thinking about what else is happening. And what I really appreciate about Co-Create is that it's creating those channels for us, not just to perform, but to have the conversations that we're having. They're performing at the InZync final, so final event now, which is happening about 5:30.
5:30.
Yes, so they probably have to go change and sound check, whatever. So if you are still around and there are tickets, usually it sells out. But please do experience more than the one poem which you experienced. English included. You'll get some English there as well. True.
Yeah, and more Dutch as well.
But definitely more Dutch.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that we'll get that. I just want to thank the Open Books headline sponsor, Leopard's Leap Wines. Dean's been enjoying that. As well as Co-Create South Africa for making these conversations possible for the last 2 days, which have been absolutely amazing. I would also like to remind you, please support the Open Book School Library projects. So books and vouchers are available for purchase at the Book Lounge, which is just up the road, as well as in the Homecoming Center. All right. And the authors, as I said, they'll be available. You can have conversations with them. You see them in performance as well. If we can just give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.